this point, I'd like to call Rabbi Yakov Skolnick, who is also sadly leaving us, to say a few words about his father. Blessed memory.
Before I reflect about all the lessons, or at least some of the lessons that I've learned from my parents, I like to just spend a moment reflecting on the past almost 5 years that I've spent in this community and how much the community has given me and how hard it's going to be for me to leave. Just a very short story, what happened to me actually, I think it was probably within the first week of coming to the community. I was fresh out of Lakewood. I'd never really experienced what it meant to be living out of town, and I was set up to learn with a nice young man. And I come to the kollel, and I introduce myself to this young man. He's wearing a suit, a yarmulke. He looks like he's been religious for a number of years. And I ask him, what would you like to learn? He says, whatever you want. I said, would you like to learn some Musar? And in Lakewood, Musar is a very big thing. He looks at me and goes, what's Musar? And that was my introduction to Minneapolis. And over the years, I've come to understand and appreciate more and more what Minneapolis has to give me. A couple of weeks ago, me and my wife were in New York looking into a couple different schools for my daughter, and I realized that what I was searching for in New York didn't exist there. It only exists in Minneapolis. This place, this community, it allows everyone to grow, it allows everyone to be an individual, it allows everyone to be who they're supposed to be. And for that, I'd like to thank, first of all, the kollel, and the Chavra kollel, the Resh kollel, the Rabbanim, and the whole community for giving me these past 5 years and for allowing me to make this part of myself and take it with me. I like to focus on two aspects that my father left, sort of a legacy, when he passed away this past October. My father was sick for 2 years. He had Yanamachal, he had cancer, and we saw him battle it. We're all familiar with the concept of an nisayon, a test from God, a test from Hashem. We conceptually understand it, but yet, when we're faced with it, we have a very hard time living it. The concept of an nisayon is to allow the abilities, the strengths that a person has to actualize itself, to come to fruition, for a person to become great. And I saw this firsthand in my father. My father was never a big complainer. We rarely heard him complain about anything. And when he was sick for 2 years, throughout the time, he got weaker and weaker, and we would have expected to see him starting to complain, and yet we'd never heard a word. My sister told us that there was for a certain treatment that she took my father to the hospital, and my father was extremely weak then, but he was walking. So as he was going, it was on the second floor, he had to take breaks as he was walking to catch his breath and gather his strength. And my sister saw that he was strengthening himself to go and move and walk, but he didn't complain. And there my father and sister are sitting in the waiting room, and then there's a different woman that was wheeled in a wheelchair, and she's complaining, and she's screaming, and she's calling out that I can't deal with this. And my sister looks at the woman, and looks at my father, and looks back at the woman, and realizes my father is going through the same pain that she is. She sees it on his face, but he doesn't complain. Complaining comes when you think you're owed something. You expect things to go a certain way. My father never expected, and throughout the sickness, we saw that he still didn't expect. We're familiar with the concept called a malach, the actual angel, and we're used to understanding that an angel is a being that God created that has no free will. But the Ramchal and others say that in actuality, an angel has free will. They're just so clear in what God's will is that they practically don't have free will. And I saw this with my father. When my father went for his last treatment, and he came back, and I was there at the time, And he said that the doctor doesn't think that there's anything more to do. And I looked at my father and I said, Tati, how do you deal with such a thing? And without blinking, he looks at him and he says, Hashem gave me my life. I'm going to complain? I'm going to complain? And that was when I realized that my father had reached a level similar to an angel. It might sound crazy, but he was living with the reality that God controls the world, nothing else. And he accepted it, and he was okay with it. And this is one of the legacies, one of the lasting legacies that my father and mother together had left for our family. Throughout the time of my father's illness, both my parents were constantly being mechazik and strengthening the family to allow us to get through it. And we saw that more than my parents cared about themselves, they cared about us. They wanted to make sure that us as children, we could handle it and we can make it through. I like to end with a pasuk. There's a verse in Mishlei that says, Atera zikenim b'nei banim. The crown of the zikenim, of the elders, of the grandparents, are the children and grandchildren. And the Mefarshim, the commentaries explain that this means as follows. It doesn't just mean that you have children, you have grandchildren. It means that you have children and grandchildren following in your footsteps, living the values that you live, living the life that you lived. And I think for me and for my family, and for all of us here focusing on honoring our parents, the greatest honor that we can bring to our parents is reflecting on the lessons and the life missions that they lived and being that ourselves and living that type of life. Thank you.